My name is Natasha Bunzl. I'm a PhD candidate at NYU in the Department of Nutrition and Food Studies. And today I'm presenting a project and theory information that I'm provisionally calling Estoy acostumbrado a otro sabor. I'm accustomed to other flavor, flavor displacement and the collapse of an abundant food system. And so I'm going to welcome you into the project with a little ethnographic episode. Villa del Rosario, Colombia, is so close to the border with Venezuela that my research partner Sam's watch keeps switching by 1 hour, toggling the time difference between the two countries. We're sitting in a building that's been converted into a daycare center for children impacted by Venezuela's political and economic crisis. A sign on the wall declares Educación sin fronteras, or education without borders, but the border is an undeniable presence. Each day in the dry, scalding heat of this part of the world, the staff of this organization receive 300 children who have crossed that nearby border, sometime in their short lives. Some of the children still live in Venezuela and come over the border every morning through unofficial crossings. The vast majority, though, now live in Colombia. We are here to interview their parents about their experiences with food on both sides of this border. We are interested in their strategies for adjusting to a new food system, meaning the complex web of people, products, and processes that bring food from production to consumption. But soon after we begin interviewing, it's time for lunch. So along with everyone in the center, we take a break. We are treated to a steaming hot meal by the chefs who cook from scratch for the children each day. For many of them, this is the largest meal that they will be served the entire day. After the children are served, a chef brings us 2 styrofoam trays which contain the tricolor Pabellon, Venezuela's national dish. And after 20 or so interviews, Sam and I had already remarked that we felt like this dish came up in every conversation we'd had with our Venezuelan interlocutors about food and identity. The Pabellon is salty, satisfying, and almost too filling. I'm struck by the fact that even as we have sweat streaming down our faces, the scalding food still feels good to eat. It is a dish defined by abundance. Ultimately, we must admit defeat and bring the leftovers out with us in a plastic bag, something that is embarrassing in the context of interviews that inevitably touch on hunger and food insecurity. So in this presentation, I'm going to present a theory that I'm working on, flavor displacement. This theory emerged inductively from the data that I collected in Colombia. Flavor displacement is an unchosen rupture in a population's access to specific foods and flavors that are integral to its identity formation, collective memory, and sense of belonging, such that their sensory experience of home and safety is destroyed. It is related to, but distinct from migration, and underscores the sensory and experiential aspects of displacement that can sometimes get lost in more structurally focused analyses. This theory started to emerge as I analyzed 40 semi-structured interviews. Our interlocutors longed for Venezuelan flavors, in particular this pabellon, which is a composite plate of white rice, black beans, shredded beef, often with a fried egg or plantains on top. This longing stood alongside painful memories of years of hunger and food scarcity in Venezuela. Furthermore, most of our interlocutors expressed a potent disdain for the food in Colombia. They articulated an old script of Venezuelan superiority through the discourse of food and flavor, holding on to a nationalist discourse about Venezuelan privilege and abundance that has been severely damaged by the economic and political crisis. In order to process their nostalgic memories of pride in Venezuelan flavors, alongside their experience of hunger and national shame and collapse over the last years they spent in Venezuela and post-migration. The participants in the study articulate the process of displacement as having started back when they were still in Venezuela, when the country failed to deliver the food in abundance they had been promised. Their loss of home, community, and safety was processed and articulated through the sensory language of flavor. They locate positive memories of Venezuelan flavor and abundance in earlier times, long before migration, when they were displaced by the collapse of the food system. So this theory is building off of a conversation that I'm trying to have between the migration scholarship on displacement and the food studies scholarship on displacement. So there's a robust scholarly conversation that argues that displacement and migration are distinct but related phenomena. Displacement is a rupture in a population's relationship to a place that can occur with or separately from migration. As Ali writes, displacement is processual, coercive, and disruptive to valued ways of living and functioning. Importantly, it precedes the potential outcome of the process, forced migration, with which it is misleadingly conflated. Increasingly, migration scholars are pointing out the sensory dimensions of of displacement. So Western in 2020 proposes the idea that paying attention to the oralities of displacement sharpens the political dimensions of this process and democratizes theory. Scholars of food and migration have paid keen attention to the way that sensory dimensions of migration chart the sensory dimensions of migration, charting the way that migrants recreate and adapt their food in new contexts to create settings of home, or as this quote from the book Food Across Borders says, in their displacement, they seek home through the palate. However, this body of literature has not contended as much with the phenomenon of displacement as something structural, independent from migration, nor the way a collapsing food system impacts sensory life. So now I'm briefly going to summarize the empirical material that led to this theory formation. Almost all participants explained that one of the reasons they left Venezuela was because of food shortages, and across class backgrounds, they reported having experienced hunger and the collapse of the food system in the years leading up to their departure. Participants reported waking up in the middle of the night or very early in the morning to join lines that would last until morning, and sometimes even having waited in these lines, they were unsuccessful in getting food. These experiences were particularly painful in light of the fact that Venezuela's government was one of the first in the world to codify the citizens' right to food at the turn of the century. Since Chavez came to power in 1998, Venezuelans have been promised that they were entitled to the wealth that the oil underneath their soil generated for their country, and this would ensure good access to food for the entire population. And for a period of time, this abundance did exist, but it no longer does. Andrea, one of my interlocutors, explained that in Venezuela, after the crisis began, the butchers that once sold abundant meat in every variety started offering only bones for broth or chicken skin by the kilo. The flavor displacement process that began in Venezuela with the collapse of the food system continues in Colombia, when the sensory experiences and flavors that were structurally unavailable in Venezuela become culturally unavailable in Colombia. Participants put Venezuelan food in general, and Pabellon in particular, in dialogue with Colombian cuisine, and whenever they did, Venezuelan food came out on top. Diana complained, "I don't know why, but food here tastes a vinegary flavor." Same with the mayonnaise. In Venezuela, we have mayonnaise, but it doesn't taste like vinegar like it does here. Many Venezuelans articulate their nostalgia for the country exclusively through food. Gabriela finds herself eating simple meals of rice and eggs in Colombia and closing her eyes to just imagine she was eating a delicious meal like Pabellon. These instances of longing for the flavors of home embody the experience of processing flavor displacement by memorializing a lost experience of flavor. Because they are unable to eat adequate or desired foods, our interlocutors experience a sense of pain and not belonging. This dish recalled not only the flavors of Venezuela, but the different cultural practices around eating and sensory environments that participants felt cut off from due to their displacement. Julio longed to eat in community with his family when he described what Pabellon means. When Venezuelans critique Colombian food, they aren't only talking about the pepper that can't be found in Colombia or too much vinegar, but they're also making a claim about the character of the people and how it is expressed through their food. Andrea remarked that in Colombia, arepas compared to the Venezuelan version are thin. Venezuelan arepas, on the other hand, are overflowing with ingredients in abundance. She connected this to the culture of each country. Mariana decried the fact that no one in Colombia shares food or will give out a free plate of food to a neighbor or stranger, whereas in Venezuela, food was shared freely. When Venezuelans describe a distant past in which their food was defined by abundance, they are talking about a time before their displacement began, describing a national identity based on the idea of wealth and richness that comes from the ground. While in Colombia, they describe a certain kind of abundance, grocery stores that are full, protein available at every meal. In cultural ways, it is perceived to be lacking. These participants valorize this single national dish and disparage their home country's cuisine to articulate the way that the pain of displacement still lives with them. So to return to the plate of Pabellon from the beginning that we couldn't finish, our leftovers embodied the paradox this whole project has tried to explain. A dish defined by abundance was also used as self-definition for people who have lived through years of scarcity. Our interlocutors disentangle food from flavor. When food itself was lacking in Venezuela, it was the lack of flavors that ruptured their sense of home. And in Colombia, where there is food, they are still feeling unrooted because they are still lacking the flavors they associate with home. That remembered flavor that they can no longer reach in Venezuela or in Colombia, and the consequences of its absence is what I'm proposing we understand as flavor displacement. Thank you.